Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Quest for Truth. Now, we've been talking about, in Luke chapter 8, we've been talking about these glimpses of the kingdom of God that we've been seeing throughout, that Luke is especially put here back to back in order for us to see what the kingdom looks like that Jesus will bring. And there's even a couple interesting things today that we'll look at that bring out that idea of, the kingdom isn't here just yet, while we're looking at what it's actually gonna look like. And so I think today is probably, at least for us, one of the most powerful views of the kingdom that we've looked at so far. So let's get right into it. Luke chapter 8, starting in verse 40, going through 56. So we're finishing up the chapter today. So I'm going to give it a read through and then we'll talk about it. And as Jesus returned, the people welcomed him, for they had all been waiting for him. And there came a man named Jairus, and he was an official of the synagogue. And he fell at Jesus' feet and began to implore him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter, about 12 years old, and she was dying. But as he went, the crowds were pressing against him. And a woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years, and could not be healed by anyone, came up behind him, and touched the fringe of his cloak, and immediately her hemorrhage stopped. And Jesus said, "Who is the one who touched me?" And while they were all denying it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone did touch me, for I was aware that power had gone out of me." When the woman saw that she had not escaped notice, she came trembling and fell down before him, and declared in the presence of all the people the reason why she had touched him, and how she had been immediately healed. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." While he was still speaking, someone came from the house of the synagogue official, saying, "Your daughter has died. Do not trouble this teacher any more." But when Jesus heard this, he answered him, "Do not be afraid any longer, only believe, and she will be made well." When he came to the house, he did not allow anyone to enter with him, except Peter and John and James, and the girl's father and mother. Now they were all weeping and lamenting for her, but he said, "Stop weeping, for she has not died, but is asleep." And they began laughing at him, knowing that she had died. He, however, took her by the hand and called, saying, "Child, arise." And her spirit returned, and she got up immediately. And he gave orders for something to be given her to eat. Her parents were amazed, but he instructed them to tell no one what had happened. So as we've been looking at these glimpses of the kingdom, we come to this passage where we see Jesus healing this woman who had a bleed for a long time, and raising this girl from the dead. And so let's just start right at the beginning. So Jesus returned. So he was, think back the last couple of weeks, he had crossed from Galilee over to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and he cured a man with many demons there, and then he's returning. So he's coming back to Galilee, back to the Jewish side of the sea, where he did most of his ministry, or has done so far, and the people are welcoming him. And I think that's one of the things to note, is that when he went to the other side, he was met by this, this deranged man essentially, and no one else. But in Israel, that he was met by all of these people. Word had spread, as we saw, going back to the first few chapters even, word spread about him. And so they're all coming to him looking for healing, and that is what Jairus came to him for. This official of the synagogue in, where Jesus had taught, where Jesus had done miracles, and so he was aware of, who Jesus was, and he had seen the works that he had done, and so he went to him because his daughter was ill and was dying. And so he goes to him and tells him, implores him to come to his house to heal his only daughter. And on the way, and before we actually get to that, a couple of times, like at the end of verse 42, it says the crowds were pressing against him. And the word for pressing there literally means to choke. And it implies that there are so many people around him that there's basically no room to breathe, essentially. Like, it's all packed in as they're traveling down these, these small roads through the city, but there are so many people around him that are traveling with him that he's unable to basically, you can't move against the crowd. You're kind of just moving in one direction. And that's important, as we'll see, because, this woman comes up to him and touches the fringe of his cloak, of his garment, and she's healed. Now, it's worth noting, of course, that there's this interesting play here where Jesus kind of stops and said, "Who touched me?" And he said, "Someone touched me because I felt the power go out from me." And that's a little weird because, how would Jesus isn't unaware of the power that he has, or the power that goes out from him. And this woman wasn't healed by Jesus's garment. He's not like a little, I don't know, like radiating. So when you come and touch him, you're just kind of magically healed. It was him who healed her. And in her reaching out to him was her demonstrating her faith. And you see that in verse 48 when he says, "Your faith has made you well." And so he calls out this woman and he says, "Someone touched me." And so she knew that she wasn't gonna, escape notice. And she knew that she wouldn't get away. So she said, it was me. And she explained why. And Jesus said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." So he didn't want to let her just touch him and then kind of fade off. Because there's something deeper. Jesus understands that this woman doesn't just need to be healed physically. No, she was healed, from this 12-year hemorrhage, but she needed something more. And so he stops her and says, "Your faith has made you well. Go in peace." And so that holds this idea of, even when we're looking at these glimpses of the kingdom, we have to be aware that we're not in the kingdom yet. We're living in a world that we can look out and see is broken, and we face sickness, and we'll get to this in a minute. We face death, but faith doesn't necessarily overcome all of those things in the sense of making them go away. Sometimes it does, like in this case, but Jesus said, no, there's something more important. you need faith in me. Your faith has made you well. It wasn't you touching the garment that made you well. It was your faith that you have in Jesus that makes you well, more than just physically well, but spiritually well, and at peace with God. So then we have the girl, her father, who came to Jesus initially, and you can imagine as this whole thing is going on, he's trying to, doing all that he can to say, please hurry, we need, but while this interaction is happening, someone from the house comes to them and says to Jairus that his daughter died, and we don't need to bother the teacher anymore. And before he can respond, or before anything else can happen, Jesus breaks in and says, "Do not be afraid any longer, only believe, and she will be made well." Now we see that believing again. And she will be made well. So they come to the house, and he takes with him Peter, John, and James, his three kind of closer disciples, or the closer of the disciples, and the girl's parents. And now there's something interesting that is, so it says, now they were all weeping and lamenting for her. So there's all these, so one of the traditions in Israel at this point was you basically hired people to come and to weep loudly for when someone died. And so when Jesus says to them, "Stop weeping, for she has not died but is asleep," that's not it can seem like it's a kind of a cruel thing to say to people who, they're someone that they knew has died. But that's not what it is. What he's saying is basically, be quiet. There's no need for you here to be weeping for her, because she isn't dead. And he says, but she's asleep. Now that brings up an interesting thing here, because he says he's not asleep, and some people would take that to say, well, maybe she didn't really die. But what does it say in the next verse? And they began laughing at him, knowing that she had died. So they knew she died. So she died. And we'll see a little bit, a further point of that she died. And Jesus uses this idea of sleep a couple of times in his ministry to suggest death. But what he's saying, like, she's going to come back. She did die, but I'm going to basically awake her. And when you think about it in that sense, Jesus' power over death is basically the same as you walking into someone's room and shaking them and saying, "Hey, wake up." Now, obviously, there are some people that are a little heavy sleepers, but you take someone who's a light sleeper and you shake them slightly and say, "Wake up," they wake up. And that's exactly what Jesus does to awake this girl from the dead. He took her by the hand and said, "Child, arise." He just grabbed her hand and said, hey, wake up. And then verse 55, and her spirit returned. So she died. Her spirit left her body. Where it went, presumably to Abraham's side. And then her spirit returned, and she got up immediately. Not even a moment of whoa, what's going on? How, she got up immediately. She was dead, but now she's alive. And it's not well, I'm alive, but there's this kind of like, whoa, how, like kind of coming to, sort of like when you wake up, you're kind of groggy. You're kind of, it takes you a minute sometimes. But this girl got up immediately, and he ordered them to give her something to eat. And I think part of that, when Jesus came back, he was eating. He ate with his disciples. He was eating. He ate with them on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. And I think part of that is to demonstrate that she was really alive, that she was really, really there, like physically alive, not just some kind of anything else that you could possibly think of. But also because she was probably hungry. I mean, not only was she sick before this, so she probably hadn't actually eaten in a while. So it's just a practical, hey, give her something to eat because she's hungry. She's, a 12-year-old girl, and she hasn't eaten in maybe a few days much of anything. So she's hungry. And her parents were amazed, as anyone would be who saw their child, or even, someone that they knew or someone that they didn't know, being raised to life. But he instructed them to tell no one what had happened. And this comes back because we've talked about this a little bit, because there were a few other times in Luke, especially early on, where Jesus tells people, well, don't share this with people. And I think what this is there was a lot of people were following Jesus for the healing, the physical healing, the miracles. And what Jesus is saying, and don't tell everybody what's happened, is I don't want people to come to me just because they're sick physically, just because they have a demon, just because they, they're going through a rough patch in the lake. I think this points to the deeper part of Jesus coming in his first coming, and that is to die for our sins. He didn't want everyone coming to him just for the physical gratification. He wanted people to come to him to save them spiritually, to make them at peace with God, to heal their relationship with God. And I mean, thinking about this, he's, God, the Messiah, and he comes to his people and they reject him. And you got to think that at times it was very difficult for him, because all of these people are who he came to save, and yet they're rejecting him, but they'll take the miracles. And so he's saying, I don't want people to come to me just for the miracles. I want people to come to me, to know me, and to receive me in faith for their sins. And the rest of it will come in the second coming. The rest of it, I will bring you this healing, but first you need the healing that comes through the cross and having faith in Jesus Christ. We'll see you next time.